Absolutely. So Tecnoglass has been a company that's listed on NASDAQ and the BVC, the Bolsa de Valores de Colombia, now for, I think, NASDAQ for some years. Am I correct?
Ever since 2013, so we're going in 5.
Okay, and then on BVC since, I think, the beginning of last year, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Great, great. And so tell me about what precipitated Tecnoglass deciding to list. Usually, obviously, companies are raising funds, but then to more recently, aside from already being on NASDAQ, to go ahead and list on the local Colombian Stock Exchange.
So basically, it was an opportunity to make the company known in the markets in which we participate. Our main market is the U.S. with about 70% of our sales. Mm-hmm. So it was a way to further penetrate some markets within the U.S. where Tecnoglass was not known. Originally, Florida was the vast majority of our sales, but by being public, we were able to penetrate other markets within the U.S. With having clients know who the company was, having public information out there, having incremental bonding capacity also helped us participate in larger projects. So it was an initiative not only necessarily to raise cash, but a strategic initiative to penetrate the U.S. market. And then on the Colombian listing, because we didn't do an IPO, we just did a reverse ADR, it was basically an opportunity to give local investors an opportunity to participate in the company as well. So it was, given that we are a Colombian company, we also wanted to open the opportunity to local qualified investors and retail investors to participate in the company upside.
That's interesting because you have some Colombian companies that are listed in the U.S. With ADRs, but you guys have done the reverse, where you've taken your Colombian company, but they're doing ADRs from the U.S.
That's
here
right.
Locally. That's really innovative. So tell me, now that you are in the routine of quarterly reporting, I think you guys have an earnings call coming up here next month, if I'm not mistaken, or the end of this month.
Yep.
How has that discipline changed, if it has changed at all, the planning? This company is still run by its founders. The founders have a long-term vision. How has that discipline, how is that bringing or developing the financial department of the company reoriented towards public markets? How has that change impacted the culture of the company internally?
Quite a bit. I think this has been a very nice success story of a family-based company that has grown into a large corporate listed in 2 exchanges, having publicly issued debt into the U.S. and European markets. So it's kind of a mix in the sense that the family members are still very, very much involved. Our CEO and CEO are running the company. But you have to have a mix in the sense that obviously being public implies having a lot of regulations, a lot of filing necessities, and a lot of other activities that normal family-based companies don't have. I think that the vision continues to be long-term. We're very much running the company for the next 5 to 10 years with a vision of being a $500 million company within the next 5 years or so. But also on a quarterly basis, you gotta have, your financial planning in order. You're gonna have all the SEC requirements that non-public companies don't have. So in order to be an SEC listed company, you're also gonna have to have some of your staff being proficient in US GAAP, having some skills that not necessarily a private family-owned company would have to have. So it's a mix. I think that at the end, the strategy continues to be one that is long-term, but you measure the long-term process on a quarterly basis, and that's a change. I mean, you have to have, very good vision on the short term and what the results are going to be, not only for the next year or 2 years, but for the next quarter. But also keep in mind that you're running the company for the long term and doing what is best for the company for its sustainability over the long haul, as opposed to just running it quarter by quarter.
Right. Now, Tecnoglass is in the league with other large and well-known Colombian companies that are publicly listed. We have Ecopetrol, the state-controlled petroleum company, Avianca, Bancolombia. So how did the market receive you when you first listed, when you first went to NASDAQ? What was the reception? Were the analysts or was the investor community somewhat familiar with you already? Was there a learning curve to orient them? I guess they're not even, Ecopetrol is a petroleum company, then there's financial companies like Bank Colombia. A manufacturing and export, a smaller, relatively speaking, export-oriented manufacturer from Colombia is not something that they probably see every day. What was the reception like, and what have the challenges been in the capital markets and in the institutional debt markets?
Yeah, so this is kind of a different story in the sense that it wasn't public through a straight-up IPO, but it was done through what's called a SPAC, which is a special purpose acquisition vehicle. Basically, there was already a vehicle that was publicly listed, and that basically took over the private company, that took over Tecnoglass. And in that transaction, Tecnoglass became public.
Right.
But the process of getting to know the company and raising funds is pretty similar in the sense that you conduct a pretty extensive roadshow to go in and market the company and kind of educate investors as to what the company is, what the markets are, why it's a different story, why is a structural different story than your competition, where are the advantages. But that's an ongoing process, really. I mean, the first amount that was raised was obviously done in 2013 through a very extensive process. But the truth of the matter is that ever since last year, we've been going and seeing investors, doing road shows, talking to a lot of people to continue to have that flow and new investors coming on board. And hopefully having your stock price reflect a proper valuation. So it's really an educational process that is ongoing. It's not necessarily one that took place 4 years ago and then it stopped. It's one that is ongoing, and we are scheduled to participate on 2 or 3 different conferences in the third quarter, and then a couple other ones in the fourth quarter. So it's something that, as part of the investor relations initiative, you have to continuously be out there and getting people to know the story and trying to penetrate different investors that you haven't talked to. So it's really, what was done at first and then what's been going on ever since.
I imagine with the success that Tecnoglass has had, it's kind of paved the way, and it'll probably be easier in the future for other Colombian manufacturing companies if they decide to go that route.
Yeah, I think you have to be ready to be public. It's not a process that is easy to absorb, and it's not something that you're going to learn overnight. So it's certainly something that you want to make sure that the company has enough scale, it has enough resources, and is ready to basically make the change. I think we don't probably know enough in Colombia about accessing the capital markets. To tell you the truth, I think a lot of the companies, other than the typical top 10, top 15 companies, are basically just relying on bank financing.
Right.
There is really not a whole lot of companies that issue bonds or that go out and issue equity. But those are, very well suitable options to grow a company, and I don't think we just have that culture. And unfortunately, our capital markets in Colombia are not as deep as you would like. I think it's a learning process, and we're going that way with the MILA integration, being associated with Mexico, Peru, and Chile as having one stock exchange. But I think we have ways to go. I think we need to educate corporates more and kind of making them more aware as to what it could make for or it could mean for their companies, and have people see this as a viable option.
It seems that the capital markets are very immature in Colombia. Private equity didn't really exist here. The laws weren't really set up to facilitate a private equity, private capital industry until 13 or 14 years ago. We've talked with Isabella Munoz, the president of, the director of Col Capital, the gremio for private equity, and it seems that traditionally the economy, which has been agrarian, it's been set up for family-owned dynasties. Earlier, Mr. Diaz mentioned the Santo Domingo family, for example.
Yep.
And that's how things have worked here and in a lot of other Latin American countries for a long time. And now bringing in investment capital and bringing in market-based capital is a relatively new phenomenon. I think in many places in Latin America, Brazil and Mexico are a little bit more advanced, perhaps Chile, but Colombia seems to be now on board, but it seems to be still relatively new. A new thing here, and companies are not necessarily used to dealing with or navigating public capital markets.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. They're not used to it, and I think the new era of PE funds is definitely up and going. You see a lot more PE funds being interested in Colombian-based company. Obviously, the investor confidence and what's transpired in the country over the last decade or so, as far as having confidence from other people that the country is secure and that there is, that you have all of what is required to be successful here from a political standpoint, from a security, from basically everything that an investor would look for. I think we're up and going. I mean, there's a lot of PE funds. There's a lot of activity. There's been M&A from PE funds coming from offshore, wanting to invest in Colombia. And I think that's definitely another viable option. I think PE funds look to have the same interest as the company do. They want to grow the company. They want to make it more profitable. They want to establish better practice or best practices in order for them to go out and eventually go out of that company when it's much more robust, when it's a much larger company. So I think that if there are some good fits for PE funds to come in and join private companies, it should also be seen as a viable option. I think it's going to have its own challenges, obviously, from a corporate governance and from a control perspective. But I think there's definitely good fits for different companies to take advantage of what a PE fund can bring to the table. And I think we're going to see a lot of growth out of that. We're already seeing it, and I don't know the numbers exactly, but the amount of PE funds that were present in Colombia and active 10 years ago versus what it is today has to be tremendously different.
Oh, it's much different. I mean, it was the industry didn't exist 15 years ago in Colombia.
That's right.
And I think the way it was explained to me, I think they were Chilean investors came in and had lobbied and took some leadership and got some of the laws changed and such that, and now there's quite a thriving private equity and private capital community. I was at their industry event a few months back in Bogota, and it had interest from the world over. There were investors there from Israel, there were investors there from South Africa, there were investors there, obviously, from the U.S. Some very large players from the U.S. Were there, from the rest of Latin America. And it was very interesting to see. It seems that Colombia has left that old kind of family dynasty kind of thing where you're going to be the president of the company because you're my nephew, versus let's go out and get professional management and have some professional capital. And that, I think, has been one of the things that has held the Colombian economy back in the past. And now the country seems to be making good time in catching up and in modernizing those markets and those structures.
I think the frontiers have been open. I think the mentality of business people has changed. Like you said, I think companies are more professional, more structured. They're sophisticated. You're looking at a lot of companies becoming multi-Latinas as opposed to just being local-based economy companies. So I think it's an evolution and a positive one. I think there's a lot of companies growing beyond the Andean region, which is very positive. There is relationships being established with Europe, with Asia. The government actually is very active every year in going out and promoting Colombia, so investors can take a look at what the country has to offer. I think that this year's round just concluded, about a month ago. And the president, the Ministry of Finance, and all of his team kind of lead the way, and they bring along, top class executives and CEOs from the main Colombian companies. So I think there's much more of a showcase for people to know the country, to know the economy, to know its companies. And I think that's paving the way. I think that's basically being fruitful as to the growth that you're seeing from some of these companies.
Very impressive. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.